الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. All praise is due to Allah, and His praise and blessings and peace be upon His Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his family and his companions until the Day of Judgment. My dear brothers and sisters, thank you for joining us for another episode of The Rope That Binds Us, as-sunnah waljama'aah. We'll continue talking about some of the principles that the people who follow the way of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions have set and put as a guidelines for those who dealing with the textual evidence, how they can understand the textual evidence and how they can drive rules from it. Today's rule or the principle we would like to start with saying this rule says, whoever cannot understand a text from the Quran or Sunnah must accept it. He must understand that this is due to his own lack of knowledge. The fault is not in the knowledge of the Quran and Sunnah. So this is the rule of today. Why are we saying that? We're saying that because not necessarily that everyone will be able to understand every single point or issue in the religion. Every single issue and point in the religion. Not everyone. But there is nothing in the religion, nobody can understand it at all. Because there is no point from revealing something to humanity where no one can understand it. When there is no one can understand it. That's why Mujahid ibn Jabr said, I read the whole entire Quran with Ibn Abbas 4 times. Every time I stop him in every single verse and I ask him about the meaning of this verse for every single verse in the Quran. And he said he was able to answer me and to explain to me the meaning of every single verse in the Quran. So there is nothing in the Quran and Sunnah, as some people claim this is the great secret, or it's unknown, or as you see, believe but don't think about it. It's you cannot understand, just blind faith. We don't have that. But in the other hand, we don't have also that every single issue, it means that every single person will be able to understand it, because that required knowledge. So I'm not a doctor. I cannot play the role of a doctor, but still I can understand some of what the doctor might tell me about if I'm sick or I have a disease. He will try to explain to me. I can understand general idea about what he's talking about. But as for the details of it, or the detail what this medicine or how this medicine actually function in the body, I might have a general idea, but exactly this is not my specialty. So same thing with the Sharia. Sometimes you need to refer these matters to the scholars who will be able to understand it. But what happens sometimes when people cannot understand something, immediately they jump to reject the hadith or the verse. Immediately they will put their own understanding over and before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's verse or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's hadith. So whenever you have a problem with understanding a verse in Quran or an authentic narration, don't rush to deny it. Don't rush to cancel it. Don't rush to think bad about Allah or Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or say, oh, this religion doesn't make sense. No, ask. And after you ask, and you ask the people who has knowledge, inshallah it will be clarified. Know that it is the lack of your own knowledge, but not from the Quran or Sunnah, because this religion came from the most knowledgeable, from the most wise, from Al-Hakim Al-Khabir. Also, this is, I think this is good enough for this point. Let's see what else we have. There is nothing in Quran or authentic Sunnah which contradicts common sense or the correct logic. Yes, this is fact. We don't have in our religion anything contradict what considered as a common sense or the correct logic. They cannot contradict each other. And if they contradict each other, it means either this text is not correct, this hadith is weak, or this hadith is been abrogated, or this understanding for this verse or this hadith is not the right understanding. Or it means that this logic is not correct, or what you claim is common sense is not a common sense. It's not a common sense. Because the Sharia might come with things that you will be thinking about it. You might be amazed with it, or amazed with, and it might maze you, in a sense that you will be not able to maybe understand it for the first time. You need to think about it more and more until you be able to understand it. But it will never come with something that nobody can understand. It doesn't make sense to anybody at all. There is nothing like that in the Sharia. Walillahi alhamd. Walillahi alhamd. Sometimes there are things makes a lot of sense, and things, if you think about it, why? Here, if you think about it, it might be possible to be exist. There is nothing to prevent you from believing it can be. I'll give you an example. It makes sense that we pray to Allah, to perform the prayer. It makes a lot of sense, that's right, to make this connection between you and Allah. It makes sense that you pray in the early time in the day, before you go to sleep, in the middle. But you might say, somebody said, it doesn't necessarily logically, it doesn't have to be 4 rak'ahs for dhuhr, 4 rak'ahs for asr, 3 rak'ah for maghrib, 4 for isha, 2 for fajr. Logically speaking, if you use your logic will not came to this conclusion. It has to be this number of rak'ahs. Maybe you'll say that. But there is nothing in the logic contradict that. There is nothing in the logic say it should not be 4, 4, 3, 4, 2. There is nothing. It's possible. It's not impossible. It is possible. It is possible. Because things either impossible to be, or it's possible, or it must to be. You see the difference between these 3 areas. Everything in the religion, your mind would say, it must be this way, or it's possible to be this way. But nothing in our mind, nothing in the correct logic ever will say to anything in the Sharia, it's impossible to be this way. It's either possible or it must be this way. And I hope this is clear. And this is something very unique. And if we go to every details and go through it, you will see it's either in this circle, which is must be this way, or this, or the other circle, which is it's possible to be this way. Let's go to the other one. Wow. Okay. ahlusunnah waljama'aah understand the Quran and the Sunnah first in the light of the Quran and the Sunnah. You remember what we said before? We combine all the related evidence together. So if I read a verse in the Quran, how to understand this verse? By looking to the other verses which is explaining it. By looking to the ahadith which is related to this issue. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, order us to perform the wudu, and He said, or He told us to perform the wudu. How to perform it? We look to the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ. How did he perform his wudu? And this will explain the verse which is related to wudu in Quran. Same thing with the salat, with the zakat, and so on. So first thing we go to the evidence from Quran and Sunnah. That's why you see there is books of tafsir. Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran. Explaining the Quran with the Quran. Explain Quran with the textual evidence. And that's the way of the Muslims, mufassirin. When they give the interpretation of any verse in the Quran, if you open the books which is written based on the methodology of the people of Sunnah, you will always see after they say the meaning of the verse, they will give you or what the related verses and what the related ahadith and narrations related to this issue. So basically we explain the Quran and the textual evidence in the light of Quran and Sunnah, then through the explanation of the Sahaba, through the explanation of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. We have to see what the companions said about this, because they are the one who narrated this to us. They are the one who familiar with the Arabic meaning more than anybody else. They are the one who familiar with the culture that this language was revealed and related to. Because any language related to the culture in that time and the culture change even the language. There are some words, it might mean sometimes something, but later on it will have another meaning. I'll give you an example. If you look to the word pig, khinzir, if you look to the old dictionaries, you'll see that pig is the swine or the animal, the known animal. If you look to recent dictionaries, you'll see that they might add to one of the meaning of the word pigs, policemen. And unfortunately, we don't agree with that, but you will see that in some dictionaries, that they will tell you that this is one of the meaning which is commonly used in recent modern days, because it's related to culture. So the culture has impact on the language. So that leads me to a very important point. We should always understand the text based on the nature of the language in that time, not in any other time. So this word, like the word I use, I'm sorry that I'm using this example, but that's the one I have now in my mind. Anyway, that word pigs, when you read it in the 12th century, in the 18th century, in the 13th century, it never ever can be used in the terminology where some people are using in the street of New York or street of London or in the street of whatever, Egypt or whoever using this terminology in this way. You cannot understand this word in the 18th century in the same way you use it in the 20th century, 21st century. It's impossible. That's why it's very important to go back to the Sahaba explanation, because they are familiar with the nature of the language. Then explanation of the Tabi'een, for the same reason, because they met the Sahaba, they are close to the culture, close to the language. And then the explanation of the great scholars. Unfortunately, I've seen people just jump to the Quran and trying to even write a translation to the Quran or explaining the meaning of the Quran and Sunnah, starting classes, and they're not aware of what the scholar said. Not aware of the scholar said. We should show respect to those scholars, to what they have done. They have contributed to the Muslims so much knowledge, so many research they have done, and Muslims should benefit from it. And that's why before we make a rule, before we make a statement related to the religion, before we make a judgment, we should always remember these steps. We go to the Quran and Sunnah through the explanation of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and the great scholars such as Imam Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, Ahmad, and so on. What they have said about this issue. In the end, I would like to emphasize more about what I said. It's very, very important to always look to the textual evidence in the light of those who are familiar with the terminologies, familiar with the nature of the language. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us to understand our religion in the right way and to practice in the right way. And this brings us to the conclusion of today's episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.